Hello and welcome everybody to this new and very, very special episode. My name is Vincent Babauti Labo. I'm a member of the initiative Black People in Germany and a fellow of the School of Transnational Organizing, the popular school that builds the next generation of transnational organizers and movements. A few months ago, I was contacted by two activists from the movement school, the Trainers Collective from Berlin. They asked me if I would like to record a podcast episode with them about the revolution in Sudan. And one of those activists is sitting right in front of me right now. Alice Hamdi, welcome.
Hello everyone, I'm Alice and I'm part of the Movement School. As a collective, we give organizing and strategy trainings. We strongly believe that building strong social movements is something that everyone can learn. And one of the political groups that have been very successful in building power in the last years are the resistance committees in Sudan. The resistance committees started their work in 2013 with the idea to overthrow the Islamic military regime of Omar al-Bashir. The first wave of protests in 2013 was cracked down brutally, which actually led them to work underground. Years later, when a rise of bread prices led to a wave of protests in December 2018, Sudanese people were called to organize as resistance committees in the neighborhood. Today, there are over 5,200 resistance committees in Sudan, and the struggle for social justice continues. We are very happy that we had the opportunity to speak here in Berlin with Muzna Alhaj, who is a member of the resistance committee in Khartoum. I really want to thank Vincent for the great interview and Muzna, who is a brilliant speaker. There's so much to learn from her.
It was also for me truly an honor to speak with and learn from her. We talked about the current political situation and the history of resistance in Sudan, the role of the resistance committees in the ongoing Sudanese revolution,
and about capacity building, organizing, ideology, grief, support systems, and solidarity. Now, let's listen to the wonderful, inspiring conversation.
Hello and welcome, Muzna. I'm very honored to have you. Welcome.
Hello, Vincent. Thank you for having me.
Let's jump right into it. For our listeners who are maybe not so familiar with the situation in Sudan, why did the people start to revolt in December 2018?
The people in December 2018 actually were fed up with Al-Inqaz regime. What happened specifically over the course of this year before the December revolution is that the people started suffering the economic impact of the policies. The government decided to lift subsidies. There was a decrease or actually in the bread and also people were queuing for long hours for fuel, and there was a major shortage in cash in the banks, and the exchange rates were crazy. This, of course, was the results of 3 decades of a dictatorship rule that changed the dynamics in the Sudanese society in terms of the economic impact, but also the heavy militarizations and long years of several civil wars, whether with South Sudan before its independence and in 2003 in Darfur. So finally the people were fed up, and it was of course the economic crisis was the main drive and motive for the Sudanese people, but also I would say the lack of freedom, the strong hold of the security state were also some of the reasons where the people decided to revolt against al-Bashir in December 2018.
In a press release of the resistance committees, they talk about the great sacrifices made by the Sudanese people since the 13th of June 1989. What happened?
What happened, of course, is in this date, Omar al-Bashir performed or staged a military coup with the support of Hassan al-Turabi. He's an Islamist leader, and I'd say the founder of the Islamist front in Sudan. So they staged this coup over an elected government of Sadiq al-Mahdi, the late Sadiq al-Mahdi. So basically, since that time, I would say, of course, Sudan suffered of military rule for over 50 years, because there are other military leaders before Omar al-Bashir, like Ibrahim Aboud and Ja'far Nimeri. But also I think the rule of al-Bashir was remarkable because it lasted for 3 decades, but because also it tremendously changed the Sudanese society and changed the Sudanese people, forcing this Islamist narrative on the Sudanese people. Sudanese community, of course, is majority Muslims, but they are very moderate in the way they deal with their religion and its practices. But then I think this regime actually was very, oppressing of the people. It also had weird geopolitical relationships and affiliations, and then also the way this regime handled the injustices that it created in regions like South Kordofan, Darfur, and Blue Nile, and how actually it managed to erupt several civil wars within the country. And of course, it was basically a police state where everything was censored. Freedoms and liberties were minimized or even non-existent. And actually, eventually, it was a very corrupt regime that didn't manage to handle Sudan's natural resources in a good way, despite the fact that Sudan is very rich with natural resources. But due to their evident corruption, they couldn't actually benefit from the oil industry or the other natural resources. Eventually, this kleptocracy was actually just including more members who just wanted to benefit from the situation. It wasn't even about the Islamist ideology anymore. It was just a safe haven for thieves and people who wanted just to continue to extract the resources of Sudan and continue to oppress the people of Sudan.
So the people resisted against the Islamist militaristic police state and took to the street in 2018. But presumably not only then. What other uprising happened in Sudan before 2018?
I think the people of Sudan resisted this regime since day one. There are many incidents and cases and protests and even different types of attempts to take or to topple down this regime since the early 90s. So it took over in mid-1989, and since then people realized what they were going through. And then we have martyrs and activists killed in early 90s protesting this regime or opposing this regime since day one, like Dr. Ali Fadl, for example. He's a very known martyr doctor who was tortured to death. And then, of course, throughout the years, in many situations, the people protested, but at least knowing from my experience and my age and generation, 2013 witnessed a major uprising due to the fact that the government lifted the subsidies on fuel and bread, and the prices increased. People took the streets, and specifically younger people and students, because they're always the ones who are impacted with this, because it changes the prices of the transportation they take and changes the prices of the sandwiches they eat, because they depend on their families still, so it makes their allowances even more limited. And what happened is that Omar al-Bashir brought the newly established back then Rapid Support Forces, who are basically Janjaweed, and he brought them to Khartoum to just end these protests. And the result of that they killed nearly 300 people in the course of 3 or 4 days. And they ended this uprising immediately. But I think also it had its toll on al-Bashir's regime. Year after, he was forced to stage a national dialogue where he had to sit down with several political forces, opposing political forces in Sudan, and then include them in the parliament. This is something that never happened before this uprising, because it was always, a one-man show where this Bashir and National Congress Party ruled Sudan without sharing Sudan with any other political forces. Then, of course, many individual, I would say, or not very sustainable protesting acts happened before and after 2013. In 2016, there was a famous, strike by the Sudanese doctors all over. Then all this led and we also had days of strikes and civil disobediences in 2016 and 2017. And then eventually it led to 2018, where the economic crisis got worse. As I said, there was shortages in cash, long queues for fuel and bread, and the people eventually couldn't take it anymore. And actually it started in the states outside Sudan. The first protests were also led by school students who were no longer able to find bread actually for their breakfast, and specifically in Blue Nile state and in Darfur state. And then eventually it arrived in Khartoum.
And in 2019, Omar al-Bashir was forced out of government. I initially wanted to ask I initially wanted to say that he had to resign, and you corrected me. No, he was forced out of government. And yeah, during my preparation, I read, to be honest, mostly Western media, and I was kind of irritated that they mostly specifically used this wording. He resigned due to a military coup. What is problematic with that?
I think what's problematic when you say it's a military coup, and people who are reading and don't have a background, they would just imagine that a coup happened because some other general had the desire to rule. And this actually means that they don't acknowledge that the people were protesting for more than 4 months. And the pressure that they were causing led eventually for the leadership of the military institution to force Omar al-Bashir out of power. So I think it's necessary to acknowledge that this happened, because the people were majorly protesting all over the country. In larger numbers and in a sustainable and continuous matter, until it led to April 11th, where al-Bashir was forced out of power, and the large numbers of people who were killed in the process. So just to scrap all that and say that it was a military coup, of course it doesn't do the people of Sudan the justice that they are the change makers.
What happened after he was forced out of government by the Sudanese people?
Then after he was forced out of power, what happened is that there was a military council established, a transitional military council. Unfortunately, this council included many generals of what al-Bashir used to call his security committee. And then some of these members were also forced out of this transitional council and were replaced by other military leaders. But then the leadership in the military is the same. If you already have the knowledge that this general is an Islamist or a corrupt, if he's replaced, it's more likely that you are getting a similar person. What happened is that this transitional military council led the country for 4 months, and then in August 2019 they signed a power sharing deal with the Forces of Freedom and Change. Actually, what happened in these 4 months was very interesting, is that, of course, beginning from April 6th, the protesters entered the military headquarters, or the area around the military headquarters, and staged a sit-in. This sit-in, as I said, lasted from April 6th until it was cracked down or dispersed in June 3rd. This is, I think, the optimum of the the movement, or the revolutionary movement in Sudan. I would say this sit-in was, a phenomena that might not repeat itself again in the modern history of Sudan. The way we felt and all the different activities that took place in this sit-in, it was almost a utopia for all the revolutionary forces. It showed a face to Sudan that us younger generation who were born and raised in the time of al-Bashir have never recognized before. The beauty, the art, the singing, the collectivity, and the hope. What kept us at those hard time was the hope, because the sit-in was not all good days. There were continuous attempts to disperse it. In the first 3 or 4 days of the sit-in, there were intensive attacks by the intelligence system of Omar al-Bashir, NIS back then, the National Intelligence Services System. Killed several protesters in the sit-in area through the attacks for 3 days. So it wasn't easy, and of course there was famous attacks later on from the RSF until eventually it led to the crackdown on June 3rd. But I think the Sudan that we have seen in the sit-in is the Sudan we hope for. All the ideas, all the dreams, all the hopes are the things that are still keeping us moving until now. So as I said, of course the sit-in was cracked down, and then the negotiation between the civilian forces and this transitional military council stopped, but then of course they were resumed, eventually leading to this power sharing deal in August 2019. And just as a disclaimer, this power sharing deal was rejected by many revolutionary forces, including many resistance committees and parties like the Sudanese Communist Party, because it was very obvious even back then that it's not going to be sustainable, and that the military generals are not to be trusted, because eventually they would want to seize power all for themselves. And moving forward to October 25th, 2021, after less than 3 years, they staged a coup and seized the power all for themselves.
Thank you very much for this insight. I would like, during our second phase of the interview, to talk a little bit about your specific role in the Sudanese revolution. You are organized in a resistance committee, and first, I would like to ask you, how did you become active in those committees?
Okay, so in the beginning, I was not a member of my neighborhood's resistance committee. I worked with, during the revolution, I worked with several resistance committees, as I was a coordinator to this young professionals, Sudanese young professionals body formed by some of the Sudanese diaspora who wanted to support the resistance committees financially and also in other aspects. So I was their coordinator in Khartoum, responsible for receiving the funds and distributing it to different resistance committees, but also attending the different events and functions and protests performed by these different resistance committees. I have brief history of activism even before that, but I was never part of an organization. Eventually, in last year, of course, there were very obvious indicators that this coup will happen. Even early on, everyone knew it will happen. And working as a political analyst myself, so I was following closely, and I saw all the signs for this event. So I decided that I wanted to be part of an organization or an organized body for several reasons. I wanted to actually be able to actively get involved in resisting this upcoming coup, but I also wanted to participate, and I felt like I had skills and knowledge to share with this specific organization. I felt like I could help in more organized way. But most importantly, I think I wanted to have a support system. I wanted to be around people who would feel the same way I would feel when such event happen, when the coup takes place, because this could be mentally and psychologically, exhausting, and it's just too much to take, right? So I wanted to be around people who would understand me, who would also support me, people that I can support, and people who would keep resisting without necessarily showing that they are tired or impatient or decide to stop and move on at some point. Because Sudan, or actually the change process in Sudan, it's an ongoing process, and it could go all from years to decades. So I wanted to be with people who would understand that this is, a continuous process where we make progress, but also we have lots of ups and downs. So I decided to join my neighborhood's resistance committee, and then, few months later, or less than month actually, the coup happened, and I'm thankful that I'm witnessing these events being part of this resistance committee. I also represented my resistance committee in the efforts for writing the political charter of the resistance committees in Khartoum. It's called the Charter for the Establishment of the People's Authority. And now I represent my resistance committee in our coordination body council.
And what are sort of the specifics or the mechanics of your organizing work? How do you organize within those committees?
Okay, how do we organize the different events? Of course, some of the resistance committees' work is continuous, they have actively started in December Revolution, but this is not the first time the resistance committees existed. They existed in 2013 uprising, but in a different format. I think this is maybe I would say the first time for it to exist on geographical basis, and actually to include different people, not only members of political parties or members of other political organizations, but to include even the citizens, the Sudanese citizens. How we organize is that, of course, we have communication methods, but we also meet in real life. I will give you an example. For example, on the day of the coup, immediately, even though that the authorities shut down the internet and shut down even other sorts of communication like normal calls and text messages, but because everyone lived next to each other and they know each other's houses, we gather. We went to each other and we gathered, and then we go to the streets, build barricades. Some actually decided to go all the way to the military headquarters and protest there. This is when actually the situation is tougher, and we don't have communication. So we just decide to go out, spontaneously and try to find each other and then decide from there. But when the situation is normal, where there's communication, we have a schedule for this planned schedule for each month where we schedule protests. We protest 2 times a week. And then, of course, if anything happens in the middle, sometimes we build these barricades to support some sort of a strike or to protest killing of martyrs in a specific area, especially when a mass killing happens. So yeah, it just depends on the different methods of communication that we have plenty of.
And how would you describe the general structure of a specific resistance committee?
There is the members, of course. Then these members, each one of them chooses to join one of the different offices of the resistance committee. A typical resistance committee would have a field office, and this office plans the field activities, protests, sit-ins, burning tires, one day sit-in, whatever is the specific field activity. Then you have a media office, obviously it documents and advertises for all the different activities, writes statements, posts, but also a media office within a specific resistance committee focuses on the different events also happening in the neighborhood. Sometimes the police officers from the locality attack a spot where there is, tea ladies or canteens or, people who are working in the informal sector. Sometimes they just attack them, bring or tear down their workplaces and arrest them, make them pay fines. So at least in our neighborhood, we interfere to try to stop these events from happening, and we go live on different platforms to just document this. This often scares off the police, because when they are documented live and there are people, resisting them, they sometimes change their mind and go, at least this is what happened in the last incident we had in our neighborhood. So we try to cover on the local events and the local violations conducted by the authority in a specific neighborhood. But then also, as I said, we advertise the different other activities, the developments in the political charter. We write statements to respond to different political events, because we're vocal about our opinions, obviously. Then we have, sometimes we have a resistance committee would have a health office, and this is for the field health workers, whether doctors or paramedics, who are, just there in the protests waiting for someone to need their help. If someone is injured and they can do something on the spot, they do it. But of course, if then someone is severely injured, they just are rushed to the hospital immediately. There is a financial office that takes care of the finances, receives donations from trusted sources and sometimes from the members themselves. As I said, we try as much as possible to limit our dependence on external donations, because we think that always, money comes with an agenda. So we try to minimize this. Then also there's the planning office, as I said. For us, at least, it's a new office, but then it handles all the narrations and philosophy and planning and all the intellectual work, and then it also handles the training and capacity building for the different members of the resistance committee. There is an executive secretariat, and this basically is formed of the different members responsible for each of the offices. So each office has a one member or sometimes two members who's basically, he's the one or she's the one responsible for this office. And all these officers come together in this executive secretariat, where it's more about, quick decision making.
I read somewhere that there are over 5,200 different resistance committees. I was wondering, how do you deal with internal conflict?
Okay, I'm not going to say the situation is ideal and that we don't go through conflicts, but basically we rely a lot on discussions. we leave no one behind. Everyone has to be convinced, but everyone has to be aware and knowledgeable of the specific topic we are discussing. So first thing, we make sure to share the knowledge, to keep everyone in the light, even and to explain, because in the resistance committees we have a wide range of age groups, although the majority are young people, which are in the age of college students, but we even have younger people. So we need to make sure that everyone is thoroughly understanding, and then we engage in these discussions. Sometimes they are long discussions, but they are required. Then eventually we vote. If everyone understands everything, but we can't reach like a mutual agreement, we decide to go to voting. And then eventually, of course, we accept these votes or accept the voting result. But even though if someone is not convinced, we again go back to deliberations and go back to conversations and repeat the process until we reach a vote or actually reach consensus. So we are more keen on consensus than just having this rigid voting result.
How do you deal with internal, maybe class differences or education differences?
You've got to educate yourself, and you've got to provide awareness when you have knowledge, and you need to stay aware also and keep an open mind and listen to the others' experiences and to the knowledge. So this is why sharing knowledge is very important in a setting like a resistance committee. Especially where I work, the coordination body that I belong to is for resistance committees who are in neighborhoods that are considered to be upper middle class. It's Khartoum East resistance committees. So basically we have 9 neighborhoods there, and they are considered to be, one of some of the neighborhoods that have the upper class of Khartoum city. So sometimes it's common because these members, some of them are young, new to the experience, as they are still in the process of educating themselves. So sometimes they're not very mindful of the class struggle, or their analysis for the cause is not always from this, class perspective or the socio-economic class point of view or perspective. I'll give you an example. There is a famous bank in Sudan called Bank of Khartoum, and for some time the workers at the bank, they were protesting they were on a strike for a salary increase, and then they were fired. Some of them were fired, and many of them were given a notice. And then we decided as a resistance committee that we should support their strike, especially after they were let go of their work, by going and just like standing in front of the bank's branch in the different neighborhoods that we live in. And some of the members commented that why would we support people who were protesting salary increase? So they did not, I think this comment for them, they did not think that this is like a political issue. They did not have this type of understanding, because for them they would only support people who are on strike to, overthrow the coup, like directly. But they do not necessarily always make the link between the economic issues and the political situation, and how this low wage is a direct result of messed up policies. These policies are related to the coup, but also related to all the governments that led Sudan, that caused the accumulation of this economic crisis until it reached this stage. So sometimes this lack of association happens. So unless it's for them, it's from their point of view, if it's not a clear political act against the authority, they don't feel like they have to support it. So I think this also sheds the light on the fact that maybe because there are from an upper class, or they are more comfortable in terms of money, they don't necessarily see that this is also a form of resistance by the people who need to be paid better, because eventually these people don't have different priorities. I'm sure that the employees and the workers at this bank basically do realize that a democratic civilian government would give them a better economy and therefore a better future. But their interpretation for resistance is that they want better wages. This is the way they are demanding this authority maybe to go away or to make things better. It doesn't have to be always very confrontational in terms of you need to go so we can have like a better future. So I think, maybe these where people need to make each other aware, educate each other, and be more in touch with the issues of others, and not necessarily, downgrade the other issues because they're not necessarily demanding the overthrow of a military rule. Another issue we're also, I think, facing in terms of Khartoum Resistance Committee and the other states, that we also not always, because Khartoum gets most of the attention, it gets the media coverage, it gets everything. So Khartoumians do not always seem to be mindful of the issues of the people in the rural areas. And then I think that this is something we need to work more on, and we need to change. We need to link the struggles of the rural areas with the struggle of the urban areas. As part of the self-critique my friends and I have for our work is that we often say that Khartoum always manages to, soften the revolution, because the revolution always comes from the margins or comes from the other states. It comes tougher, more firm, and sometimes even more daring, and it clearly addresses the economic issue. People are hungry, but when it arrives to Khartoum, it becomes more about freedoms, personal freedoms, liberties. Some people in Khartoum are even ashamed to say that this is about hunger or that Sudanese people are hungry. So sometimes we need to just be tough with ourselves. And actually, if we allow ourselves to address the issues of other people, because we have access, we should have like the honesty and the integrity in conveying these issues as they are, not making them about the things we think that matter.
Do you have specific maybe mechanisms to skill share also within the committees?
Okay, the committees, within them, they have like different offices dedicated for different tasks. So to begin with, if you're joining a specific office, you're expected to have at least basic skills. For example, there is a media office where you obviously have to have a skill, whether in writing, to be able to write statements, or in photography and documentation of the protests and other field activities, or whether to have a basic filmography experience where you can make all these documentary videos, but also shoot videos to advertise for a specific event, or to cover, commemorate a specific also event. That's one of the things that expected of you, or the type of skills expected of you within this office, and same goes for different other offices. But then there is the planning office within the resistance committee, where it specifically works on the capacity building and increasing the knowledge of the members of a resistance committee on specific topics. So sometimes this office basically organizes trainings and workshops for specific skill set. For example, the official spokespersons that speak on behalf of the resistance committees. These actually many of them undergo specific trainings by the planning offices where they can be trained on public speaking, on answering or speaking to specific questions, on how to conduct an interview and so on. Also, sometimes there are I would say workshops on more like political and governance issue. For example, in our resistance committees, we have recently had a workshop on local governance because resistance committees are always considering different alternatives when it comes to their future, whether they want to be involved politically or not, and they think that local councils or local governance council could be a good place to start. So we are having all these brainstorming and workshops about the settings and the dynamics and the responsibilities within a local council and how to govern your neighborhood and to govern your locality and then state. So this is how we share skills, and of course there's always the peer learning process where just peers within the resistance committees teach each other new skill sets that they already have.
In April, the resistance committees published a joint press release, the Revolutionary Charter for the People's Authority. What is the goal of this revolutionary charter?
Let me give you some background. So the several resistance committees in different Sudanese states actually written their own political charters. It just provided their political vision and their vision for the future of Sudan and how Sudan should be ruled, and they provided their insight or their vision for specific aspects like the economic vision, and also the reform of the security sector, the foreign policy, and other aspects that they think are important for ruling Sudan in a better way. So eventually they all came together, shared, tried to merge their different political visions into one vision that resulted in the revolutionary charter. Then here, the different resistance committees in Khartoum, which are basically 18 coordination bodies. In these 18, each coordination body have from 9 neighborhoods, sometimes to hundreds of neighborhoods. I don't even know how many thousand people we are talking about. So the resistance committees in Khartoum also all came together and wrote the charter for the establishment of People's Authority. I was representing my neighborhood in one of these committees related to drafting the charter. What happened eventually is that the resistance committees in the states and the resistance committees in Khartoum came together with both of their charters, and now in the process of merging these two charters in order to come up with a unified vision for the resistance committees all over Sudan. The work is ongoing now. It's a very positive move. I think the resistance committees want to be ready, not just in case anything happened, but they just want to have this united political vision, because this unity is very important. Because there are always these demands of the civilian forces in Sudan. Everyone is demanding them. By everyone, I mean the international community, but even among themselves in specific political parties that are no longer trusted by the resistance committees or by the majority of Sudanese people. There are these, allow me to call them, ridiculous calls for the unity of the forces of the revolution, but then everyone understands that there are like major differences in terms of approach and in terms of, vision for Sudan's future and Sudan's politics. So you can't just expect all civilians to unite just because they are civilians in order to be able to, face a military coup or the military generals. So resistance committees realize that their number one priority is to unite among each other first, and then maybe start uniting with other trade unions, syndicates, and so on, with civil society organizations that match their vision, not only with any civilian forces or political forces, just to claim that civilians are united, but meanwhile in reality they're not.
I was wondering, do you follow a specific ideology? And do you think one is necessary?
Personally, I don't think I do. I have what I call as an ideological crisis. Like, I've been always saying that the Sudanese young people, in their introduction to political work, they always seem to have leftist tendencies, even if they don't realize it. All the narratives they build their work on, the way they want to see the life in Sudan, they want to, I think, a socialist state. Definitely, if you're expecting a state to provide you with services, basic services free of charge, free education, free healthcare, so this means by default that you want a socialist state. And then, this is what happens. But then, unfortunately, they don't find the institutions to include them or to accommodate them or to give them more knowledge. We lack leftist institutions in Sudan. We have only the Sudanese Communist Party, which I have, lots of observations on, but that's not the place to say them. So I think there is a missed opportunity for the left in Sudan to influence a larger number of the Sudanese youth. And it's not easy under the circumstances we live in to establish a party or a movement that speaks to all these young people who feel like this could potentially be their ideology. Is it important? Whether it's important or not, I think it's eventually it becomes a reality. In Sudan specifically, there is a case of, I would say, severe polarization taking place. And I'd say even despite the fact that we are extremely frustrated with our political parties, but then these political parties still manage to recruit good number of young people. So I think there is an appetite for that. Definitely. And I think it's important for many of these young people to feel like they belong to a bigger organization. I mean, resistance committees sometimes give an enough sense of belonging, but especially for young people who have ambitions, political ambitions, and maybe one day they want to be in the parliament or to be, just active politicians. It's important for them to join political parties because often in Sudan, people practice politics through political parties. It's not easy for you, although we don't have this history of fair and general elections, but it seems like the norm that if you want to practice politics, you do it through your membership in a political party because the political party gives you the support, it finances your campaign, it has constituency in different parts of the country. It has many of the means that you could lack as an individual to have your own independent campaign. So the appetite is there, but the institutions, they need lots of work.
So the political activism you are describing heavily relies on discussions or person-to-person conversations, and we live in a time of a global pandemic. So I was wondering how the COVID-19 pandemic changed your political work.
Okay, at some point, of course, it limited the work, I would say. But then the pandemic happened during the transitional period. It was still a time for protesting because the resistance committees, I would say since the first day they were opposing of the agreement that resulted in forming this transitional government, but they also protested lots of the policies of the transitional government, especially the economic policies, because after everything we suffered with al-Bashir regime, the last thing we wanted is a government that would lift subsidies and, sign deals with them International Monetary Fund or World Bank and subscribe to all their recommendations, because they are tough recommendations that the people didn't have the means to tolerate, because they were already suffering of economic crisis. You can't just minimize subsidies or lift subsidies on all the important goods. So this was the type of the issues that would be protested in the transitional period. Also, of course, the major neglect for the issue of justice. A bigger sentiment, or one of the motives and drives that keep the resistance committees going in terms of emotional sentiments, is that the martyrs, all their comrades they have lost along the way. This is what keeps them alive. They feel like the continuation of protesting is a form of showing loyalty to all the people who were killed defending this same exact cause. Sometimes even they go as far as saying that feeling tired is a treason for all those who lost their lives trying to achieve this goal. So all these issues were protested during the transitional period, but of course in the time of the pandemic, protests were limited, especially in the times of the quarantine. But then after that, I would say that, we were back in business, even in times that maybe we were not supposed to be. We received some critique in several occasions, but nothing crazy happened. We survived.
I want to touch on a maybe rather difficult questions, but you also mentioned it a lot, the let's call it very tragic part of the revolutionary struggle. You talked about the thousands of people that died resisting the military dictatorship since the 90s already, and I was wondering, how do you deal as a movement within the resistance committees with grief and loss and the violence?
Okay, I would assume that Bashir regime had killed millions of Sudanese people, whether those who were protesting or whether those who died in civil wars. So these are large numbers, sometimes even beyond imagination. It's very tough, of course. I know young men and women who lost up to 3 or 4 best friends in these protests. They were killed. And it's just tough. And also surviving major events like the sit-in crackdown, and because this is a place where we all lived, literally lived for months and had hopes and dreams. It depends. There are different mechanisms. Sometimes the organizations itself, the resistance committees, because they're not just people protesting together, they are friends, they are neighbors, they are people who grew up with each other most of the time, so they provide good support system for each other. There are lots of volunteering psychiatrists and therapists who are offering their help, in many cases even anonymously and of course free of charge. There are specific centers like Ahfad Trauma Center. It's a psychologist center in one of the universities, famous universities in Sudan, where they also work with protesters free of charge. But then I think also Sudan lacks a lot in terms of mental health infrastructure. So as much as there's voluntary work, it's mostly all voluntary work. But then you do not expect to find an institution that provides this type of help. And also because actually the government has always been, the authority has always been seized by the wrong people. So you don't expect a government institution or even a private institution to provide this type of support. And security-wise, you can't just go and say, I'm a protester who lost a friend in the protest and I want help, because you might just be arrested for coming forward with that. So it's tough. I wouldn't necessarily, I definitely think that we're not getting the support that matches the size of the trauma, but we have to manage.
You also told us that you also have been looking for a support system in the resistance committees. Is this support system in a way institutionalized, or is it just informal within the committees? I don't know, friends helping friends, neighbors helping neighbors.
It's not necessarily, but I think it's something expected. I think one of the values and one of the foundations of organizations like the resistance committees is that everyone there trust each other, know each other to begin with, trust each other, and they know at some point that they support each other. Whether support each other, I would say, mentally and psychologically, but also, of course, the priorities support each other in the resistance work. So it's a crucial element of founding this organization, even if it's not like written somewhere, but it's expected that this is part of this organization, that people support each other. And it's a good place to find refuge, to find even friends. It's not just about, it's not just, it doesn't separate the resistance work from the human relationships.
What gives you power? What makes you go on?
Okay, what makes us go on, of course, is a mix of many things, but I'm just going to give you one of the slogans of this revolution, especially in this phase, and it's just going to tell you what's the vision and why are we still going on, what do we want to achieve. So it says, السلطة سلطة شعب والثورة ثورة شعب والعسكر للثكنات والجنجويد تحل. So this means that the power is the people's, the revolution is the people's, the military goes to the barricades, and the Janjaweed or RSF gets dissolved. And this basically, just summarizes the vision that we want to give the authority for the people. We want the Sudanese people to be responsible for their natural resources. They would know better how to utilize it and how to rule their local communities. They are the ones who realize their needs, and they need to have more control over their authority and more control over their resources. And we need to decentralize the accumulation of fortune and the accumulation of wealth and the accumulation of authority in central Sudan in the hands of specific privileged elite that have been controlling the life of Sudanese people since independence or even before independence. We need to get rid of this, colonizers' heritage where they just chosen specific generals and chosen specific tribesmen and tribal leaders to take over. And those people have managed until now to maintain this privilege and to maintain the wealth and the power and to neglect the people of Sudan. The second part is that the revolution is ours. We're the ones who decide who we want to rebel against, because we can distinguish our enemies very well, and we can also distinguish our welfare and decide for ourselves. Sometimes it's said الثروة, which is the wealth or the fortune. So these two words in Arabic are very similar, الثورة والثروة. Thawra means revolution, tharwa means wealth. So it's also the power. It's also the wealth is supposed to be in the hands of the people, and they decide what they want to do with it. The military to the barricades, because we are sick and tired of the intervention or of the presence of the military institution in the politics of Sudan. We are tired of these crazy, ambitious military generals who are always interrupting any effort we take to transition to democracy. We are tired of this long history of military rule that, we have plus 50 years of military rule. Ibrahim Aboud, Ja'far Nimeri, Omar al-Bashir, and now Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. And we want to see them doing their role in protecting the Sudanese people and also protecting the constitution without stepping in, without interfering. We want to see a less militarized Sudan. We want to see, less conflict. We don't want to experience civil war again. We don't want to live in the fear that tomorrow might be a day where a civil war will erupt again somewhere in Sudan. And eventually we are tired of all the militias and the paramilitaries that existing everywhere in Sudan, taking resources and ending lives because they just can. We don't want this, I would say, culture of men who think that they can seize power because they are armed. We don't want this culture to continue. We want people to, dream of a different Sudan. And these different dreams is what keeping us going on. Also, as I said, our loyalty to all our, comrades who have lost their lives during this process. Our obligation to the coming generations, because we know that the generations before us, they tried, but they couldn't succeed, and we don't want to be blamed by the generations coming after like we blame our parents and our grandparents. We want to be able to, at least, even if we don't live a good life, we want them to be able to live a good life. And there's also like a famous saying that have been said. I don't know the source, but I would assume it's a member of one of these resistance committees, where he said that our destiny is that we are the generation who's going to end the military coups, and this battle, we're not going to postpone it. And yeah, this is what keeps us going on.
Last thing, let's talk about solidarity. How can people find you and your movement, maybe online, to support in what way they want to?
Okay. We're present with, I would say, hundreds of pages on social media and also hundreds of accounts on Twitter. Unfortunately, we don't always have like a single specific platform. Each coordination body has its own platform that has larger or bigger number of resistance committees altogether. But all other resistance committees individually have also their pages and Twitter accounts. It's easier to find it on Twitter because you're going to type in English, I assume, and then you can just type the name of the neighborhood or the name of the coordination body, and then you will find us. But yeah, this is how actually you can know more about the different activities, and then you get to decide in which way you want to show solidarity. I think it's solidarity has been always very important. It's not just in terms of receiving, support. I think it's important because it's very inspirational. Before or approaching the coup, most of, I would say, many members of the resistance committees, but also the activists generally in Sudan, were always following trends of other, coups happening all over. And I remember that we were watching closely what was happening in Myanmar. And it was a very similar case to Sudan, and the way they were oppressed and the different tactics they used in their protests. And even I think during December Revolution, because this is sort of a revolution that happened in times where, internet is just accessible for most of the people in Sudan, at least who are active, and they could research and look for the trends, revolutionary trends in other countries. And we were following, protesters in Hong Kong and in Tunisia, and we were just in France, and we were just seeing how these people function, what do they use, and how they are protecting themselves. One of the things that I think I just want to demonstrate how helpful this is that we used to receive lots of, attacks, but with tear gas canisters directly in the head or in the eye, and would just cause the people to have major traumas. Sometimes it even kills them. Many people lost their eyes due to that. And I think just seeing protesters in different other countries wearing helmets and wearing sometimes these swimming glasses, and then now we're using the same tactics, and definitely it's not accessible for everyone, but it at least minimized the head and eyes traumas for many of those who have access to these helmets. And also seeing pictures of protesting, using wood or using plastic barrels as shields. This is also, all the things that we see and get inspired by and we implement in Sudan, and it helps us a lot. So I think these protesters outside are helping us with ideas without even realizing this. And at the same time, I see that how the Sudan's revolution was very inspirational for other countries. And Palestine, it's very heartwarming to see protesters in Palestine and in Lebanon and in Tunis chanting Sudanese poetry that's said in the protests, or even the slogans, using the slogans. So it shows you that we are one in this struggle, we are united in this struggle, and it's not different from one country to another, because we're facing the same, we're facing the same mentalities. All these dictators think the same, thinking that their rule is long lasting, and they're very, short-sighted. In terms of solidarity and its classic form, I would say that, of course, there is an international interest in the Sudanese cause. The amount of researches and articles that talked about the revolution in Sudan, talked about the role of women in the revolution in Sudan, is definitely also, it's a great thing, especially because it's accessible for so many people, whether academics or people who are interested in different countries around the world. So this makes different organizations interested in knowing more about the Sudanese revolution, but also they're all keen to provide different types of help. And I think specifically in the resistance committees, we're very sensitive to the topic of receiving funds. We want to stay away from this as much as possible, but then I think people are very keen to have more knowledge politically, to be more trained on how to better organize, to know of new tactics and ways to strengthen their organization, to have better communication, also to have, I would say, more creative ways of resisting this regime. So all these are means of solidarity that helped us along the way and still helping us.
Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
And also thank you everybody for listening to this episode.
And if you want to follow the resistance committees, the movement school, the School for Transnational Organizing, or the Initiative for Black People in Germany, find all the links in the descriptions.
Bye.
Bye.